So this was February the 25th, 1976. Prabhupada had been in Mayapur for about a month at this point. So there was one devotee there, Shyama Das. He was a black American devotee. He went from USA to Africa, and then from Africa he came to India. So he left the yatra in Africa, I think in September, around that time, and he came to Vrindavan to ask Prabhupada if he could just make chanting his only service. So Prabhupada wasn't very happy with that, but he saw that he was quite disturbed, and so he agreed, all right, you go to Mayapur, you chant to your heart's content. Yes, so after Prabhupada had been in Mayapur for a few days, this Shyama Das, he came to see him. He was staying out at the Gaushala, and he was chanting 150 rounds a day. And apart from that, he was only eating the remnants of food from the other devotees. And for a couple of months at least he was okay. But then when Prabhupada came to Mayapur, Shyama came to see him, and he asked for permission to build a tree hut to live in so that he could avoid seeing anyone. He complained that he was being disturbed because devotees were coming to see him, and that interrupted his chanting. But Prabhupada condemned his idea, he said, which was living like a monkey. Because he wanted to somehow or another separate himself from the devotees. He thought by living in a tree house or a hut in the trees that would do it. But as devotees came in for the Mayapur festival, and more people were coming. So then more people were hearing, oh, he's doing 150 rounds, so they go and see him. So that made him more disturbed. So Prabhupada said that Shyama's so-called renunciation was actually only another form of sense gratification. It was also based on selfish interest, even if it was only a small display of it. Prabhupada gave the example of two thieves, one who stole a diamond and another who stole a cucumber. So Prabhupada explained that simply because one steals in a small way, it does not mean that he's a thief. I mean, not a thief. So Jayapataka Maharaj asked if Grihastha life was meant for one who steals cucumbers. And Prabhupada laughed. He said, yes, Krishna is giving allowance for stealing cucumber. In other words, some sense gratification. So Prabhupada conceded that Shyama at least wasn't doing anything bad, but he said that active service is better. Prabhupada was not displeased with him, as something is better than nothing. And he allowed him to stay here because if he leaves, he may end up going elsewhere to practice something other than Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada approved, all right, live at the Gaushala, chant your 150 rounds, and be peaceful. So a week or two later, on March the 8th, then Shyama came over from his hideaway at the Gaushala at 4 p.m. to see Srila Prabhupada. He had a request to leave Mayapur and wanted to go and chant in Radhakund. with so many devotees here now for the festival, he complained that he is again being disturbed in his chanting. So Prabhupada told him that this indicates that his mind was restless. Previously he had asked to live in a tree, and now Radhakund. He said, "You are not fit for Nirjana Bhajan." This is for the Maha Bhagavats like Haridas Thakur, who were completely undisturbed. Haridas Thakur was living in a cave with a large snake, but he was not perturbed. So Prabhupada added that if one's mind is even a little disturbed, Nirjana Bhajan will not be possible. So after that meeting, Shyama Prabhu later told Pushta Krishna Swami, Prabhupada's secretary, that he had decided to return to Africa and preach there. So Prabhupada was pleased to hear this. So we didn't hear anything more for a few months from Shyama, but on September the 27th, when Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, then he received a letter from Shyama, and he had been preaching in Africa, as he said he would, but then he had left that place because, again, he was being disturbed. And in his letter, he requested to make chanting his main service again, saying that he didn't want to act whimsically and he only wanted to please Srila Prabhupada. He declared, "We have no love for Krishna, but we have this attraction to serve Krishna as a maidservant of the confidential serving maids of Krishna, the gopis. By your mercy, we understand we cannot go to Vrindavan by any ticket, so we are, by the grace of Krishna, trying to fix our minds on this service in Vrindavan. This fixing of the mind is dependent on my chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. And my chanting Krishna's names is simply dependent on your mercy, because my godbrothers don't like me chanting. We do not want to commit offenses to our godbrothers, yet sometimes when I tell them that I only want to hear about Krishna in Vrindavan, or the glories of his holy name or qualities, some say we must talk of other things. They are more pure than my sinful self. As far as this living entity, he only wants to hear or talk of Krishna. My godbrothers, as far as I am concerned, are better and more advanced, but because of my sinful condition, if you will allow me to chant these few extra rounds, read your books and render some small service, maybe before leaving this body, Krishna will allow this sinful entity to be elevated to the position of one of his loving servants. It is our only desire to have our devotional creeper take shelter of Goloka Vrindavan and to somehow or another please our spiritual master and Krishna. So that was his letter. It sounds nice, but actually it's Sahajarism. Because what he was actually saying is that he only wanted to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. He didn't want to do any other thing. He wanted to fix his mind on becoming a maidservant of the gopis of Vrindavan. And like that was his... I think what happened, I can't find any references, but what happened was that he got affected by the Babajis and other persons, and what he wanted to do was this Astakaliya Leela Smarana, thinking about Krishna's pastimes at the different times of day that they occur. It's like the Babajis. So this, I'm pretty sure that Shyama had been mixing with some of the Babajis, and he picked up this idea that your only business is to just chant. 1 lakh or 2 lakhs or whatever it is of rounds, and keep your mind fixed on Krishna's pastimes. So Prabhupada replied to him. His reply was quite terse. So he said, "Why did you leave Mayapur if you're so expert in chanting? You read my books and do some menial service, but why have you left Mayapur? You were restless, so what can be done? You were chanting in Mayapur. So wherever you may live, you have to abide by the order of the authority. Because you were restless, you were not fit for chanting, absolutely." So Prabhupada wasn't fooled by it at all, and he wasn't impressed about the fact that he was chanting 150 rounds, because he knew that it was artificial. Eventually, he wouldn't be able to keep that up, and that's how the case proved. So there was one other devotee. I had visited Birnaga a few years back. That's Bhaktivedanta Thakur's birthplace, and they follow the example of Lalit Prasad Thakur, Bhaktivedanta Thakur's brother. Bhaktisiddhanta's brother, and one of Prabhupada's sannyas disciples, Subal Swami, he had gone to visit Birnaga. He got talking with the Babajis there, and they convinced him that his only business was just chanting 64 rounds a day. So he had been given another name, I think, by Lalit Prasad Thakur, and they gave him the name Siddhartha. So I think in about 1974, he had been visiting Birnaga. He got Babaji initiation, and off he went. So later on, of course, he couldn't maintain. He sent a letter back to the devotees at Birnaga, Lalit Prasad Thakur, and he told him that, "I'm following your instructions, I'm chanting so many rounds every day, but Prabhupada wants me to go to Fiji and help with the management there." So I went there, but now doing management has disturbed my mind, so I can no longer chant 64 rounds every day as I was before. So he's another one that drifted off because of the influence of the Babajis. And as a result of that, engaging with them, Prabhupada ordered that his disciples should not go to Birnaga and mix with the Babajis there, because they'll become affected, and then the preaching will be disturbed also. So eventually Subal Swami, or Siddhartha as he called himself, left the movement and set himself up somewhere in America as a guru. And I think he eventually gave up chanting, gave up his devotional service. So that's what happens when you try to do something that you're not fit to do. Eventually it becomes a burden, then you give the whole thing up and go away. So Prabhupada wasn't very happy that the devotees were going to see Lalit Prasad and then coming away with this idea of, just chanting as your only service. Another devotee that was authorized by Prabhupada to chant extra rounds was Odalomi. He was a devotee in America that he went to see Srila Prabhupada. This was in 1975, and he had been told by a doctor that he only had a couple of months left to live. He was going to die pretty soon. So he went to see Prabhupada, and he asked Prabhupada if he could take Babaji initiation. And he explained, I'm going to die soon, I want to just fix my mind on, the Maha Mantra and leave. So again, reluctantly, Prabhupada allowed him to do that. And when we arrived in Mayapur in '76 for the festival, then Prabhupada asked, so where is Odalami Maharaj? He was the only disciple that I know of that Prabhupada gave Babaji initiation to. So then the devotees told Srila Prabhupada, well, he's not here anymore. They said that he had come there and he started his chanting practice, and then later on he met another doctor. That doctor said, no, actually, you're not going to die anytime soon, you're okay. So as soon as he heard that, he immediately left Vrindavan. He went back to America, joined up with his wife again, and he was last seen on the West Coast surfing. So he tried for some time to chant all these extra rounds, but it became a burden for him. And then from that, any little excuse, then he was gone. So like that, Prabhupada didn't like the devotees doing more than what they were capable of doing. 16 rounds was his standard, and as he said, even 16 rounds is troublesome. So these attempts by some of his disciples, to chant 64 rounds or even more than that, were artificial. And they didn't last very long. They, a few months, and then that was it, they were gone. So Prabhupada preferred that we do some practical service. Last night we read that letter where Prabhupada said you have to do some physical service. That's also transcendental, but it's what you can do. You're not fit for sitting down and chanting all the time. So in a class on October the 9th, Prabhupada was in Aligarh. Aligarh is just like an hour away from Vrindavan. So in his class, Prabhupada was making the point, he said that so everyone can be raised to the platform of Krishna Consciousness. There's no difficulty. That is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. So from early in the morning, Lord Chaitanya is teaching Udila Aruna Purvava Bhagi Dvijamani Gora Amani Jagi. When the rising sun appeared in the east, the jewel of the twice-born, Lord Gaurasundra, awakened. So Prabhupada said he was not lazy, he was very busy from early in the morning. So if we at least pretend to follow Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we cannot sleep. We must rise early in the morning. We must get up at least 1.5 hours before sunrise. That is Mangala Arati. Mangala Arati means to get up early in the morning before the sunrise. You take your bath and be prepared for the Mangala Arati. Then you begin your chanting and prayers. So this is the activity. So Prabhupada told us about an exchange that he'd had in the 1940s with the man who had challenged him that the Vaishnavas were all lazy fellows. So apparently somewhere Prabhupada met this man, and this man had been to Vrindavan. He'd seen what was going on with the Babajis and everything, so he wasn't impressed. And the general mood was that the Vaishnavas are just a bunch of beggars. They don't do anything useful. So Prabhupada had a debate with this man, and he said, this man had challenged him that Vaishnavas were lazy fellows. And so I said, this is Prabhupada speaking, I said, you have never seen a Vaishnava. No, I have seen these Vaishnavas. They do not do anything, and taking mala and pretending to be highly elevated and simply sleeping and snoring. So Prabhupada challenged him, but you have not seen. You might have seen these pseudo-Vaishnavas, but real Vaishnav you have not seen. So the man asked him, what is that real Vaishnav? And Prabhupada said, I told him that in India there were two big wars. One war was Ravan, and another was Kurukshetra. So in these two wars, the hero is a Vaishnav. One is Hanuman, and the other is Arjuna. Have you seen them? Have you heard about them? Are they lazy fellows? Hanuman is a Vaishnav. He could raise a whole mountain and jump over the sea and set fire to the very beautiful city of Ravanus. So this is a Vaishnav. And Arjuna, in the beginning he was hesitating, that my cousin brothers are on the other side, but then he decided, yes, I shall fight. Krishna had inquired from him, now I've instructed you, now whatever you like you can do. So, what is your decision? And Arjuna clearly said, yes, my decision is there, I shall fight. So, Karishye Vachanam Tava. As you advise, I understand that you want this fighting. So the Vaishnav means, for the sake of Krishna, he can do anything. Not that he is a lazy fellow simply sitting and snoring. So, and showing, I've become a big Vaishnav. Let me sleep under the name of chanting Hare Krishna. So faithful servant means always alert, and that is bhakti. Anukulyena Krishna Anushalanam Bhaktir Uttama. Simply one has to execute Anukulyena, how Krishna is satisfied. And this is bhakti. Prabhupada stressed that neither Hanuman, a monkey, or Arjuna, a warrior, were told by the Lord to give up their occupational duties to sleep and snore and become a great devotee. He never says, you are attached to this he never says, he never says that, but what he says is, you are attached to this kind of work, all right, you do it, but the results you give to me. So that is bhakti. Arjuna, you're a military man, all right, I ask you to fight. You become a fighter and become my devotee. Bhaktosi priyosi me. Just see, what is that? He was not chanting Hare Krishna, but he says, Bhaktosi priyosi me. You are my very dear friend and my devotee. So, Prabhupada's making the point that he's engaged in warfare, so he's not chanting Hare Krishna whilst he's fighting and killing so many of the opposing elements. But that, at the same time, he's still a very close and devoted friend and devotee of Krishna. So Prabhupada made it clear that he wasn't speaking against sitting down and chanting, but one has to be qualified to do that. Of course, he said the ultimate is to be always absorbed in glorifying the Lord, but not in the beginning. In the beginning, you must work very hard. You come to the stage of pure devotional platform, and then you can fully engage yourself in meditation or chanting, but not in the beginning. In the beginning, you should be very expert and active. So that is wanted. That is Lord Chaitanya's movement, Udiyala. From early in the morning, you're active. Come on, chant. Chant with me so that others will see. If we make a party for chanting Hare Krishna, so in the beginning they may be disturbed because people have been accustomed to sleeping up to 9 o'clock in the morning. But as soon as they hear the kirtan, gradually they'll become purified and they'll receive it. So Prabhupada was always pragmatic and practical about his approach. So April the 8th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. Again, he brought up this point about chanting, how many rounds. In his class, Prabhupada explained that what is required of us if we want to please Krishna and get his blessings. He told his audience, we have to surrender. That will please Krishna. And without pleasing him, you cannot see Krishna. You may have your eyes, big eyes, but you cannot see Krishna. You have to please him. That pleasing activity is bhakti. Without that bhakti, it means sitting down silently. Oh, no, I'm chanting. I don't want to go out. I'm busy. This means he's using it as an excuse. What will you chant? You will think of women and money. That's all. So just go and work. Go and sell books and work hard. That is wanted. Therefore, we do not give that opportunity. My Guru Maharaj did not give this opportunity, and we are following the same principle. No opportunity of sitting idle. No, you must work, and that will rectify you. So this talk was on April the 8th. That was the last day of the festival that year, the Mayapur festival. And most of these devotees were going to go back to their home temples within the next few days. So Prabhupada was reinforcing this understanding that you have to be practical and work hard. Go out and distribute my books. That will please Krishna. It will please me. And you'll get the benefit from that. So sometimes devotees would chant extra rounds, especially on Ekadasi, at least when I joined. Every Ekadasi we used to chant 25 rounds. So there was some debate about whether that was a requirement or just, an encouragement. So on the morning walk in Chicago in 1975, Tamal Krishna Goswami, he raised this issue of chanting 16 rounds or 25 rounds. And he told Prabhupada, I remember that you were instructing once that all of your initiated disciples should chant 25 rounds. Prabhupada said, minimum. So Tamal Krishna, he said, yes, minimum on this day. So is it a rule that we should follow in all our temples? So Prabhupada said, no, we have 16 rounds. So Tamal Krishna, he said, no, I mean on Ekadasi. So Prabhupada said, yes, Ekadasi, simply you should chant. No other business, nirjal. So Prabhupada asked, Tamal Krishna asked, no preaching work? Should they go out for preaching? So Prabhupada said, no, those who are preaching, this is not for them. Those who are sitting idle and have no other service, so they should just simply sit and chant. But preacher is so exalted, he hasn't got to follow any regulation. But don't take advantage of that. And actually, if one's business in preaching work is in being busy in preaching work, that is the first-class platform. So this is not my manufactured word. My Guru Maharaj, he also practiced that. So one devotee, Madhava Maharaj, when he was a brahmachari, his name was Hayagriva. So he was to go somewhere, but he was sick. So Guru Maharaj was informed that he is sick, and today is Ekadasi, he cannot take his regular meals. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, no, let him eat his meals immediately and go. So in that way, then, most of them were accustomed to chanting extra rounds on Ekadasi. This devotee had some urgent work to do, so Prabhupada told him, observing Ekadasi practice is secondary, preaching work is primary. So that was the mood. So again, that was June or July of 1975. February 1976, Prabhupada was in Mayapur. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was in Mayapur. And the same issue came up again. It was almost like a replay of what he'd done in 1975. Tamal Krishna asked about chanting whilst observing Ekadasi. So he told Prabhupada, we should always chant 25 rounds on Ekadasi if initiated. Prabhupada said, initiated? No, everyone. Why just the initiated? So, Tamal asked, that should be our standard for our movement on Ekadasi day. Prabhupada told him, standard is 16, but if one can chant more, then he is welcome. So Tamal Krishna pressed him a little to know if 25 rounds was mandatory or not. When Jayapataka Maharaj suggested that it was recommended, Prabhupada seemed to disagree. He said, no, Ekadasi means that, fasting and chanting. However, when Tamal Krishna referred to his men going out on book distribution, Prabhupada was quick to reply, no, that is for preaching work. For that purpose, you can stop this 25 rounds. But generally, one who has no preaching work, he should chant extra. So that way then, Prabhupada, as I say, was very practical. Preaching was always the first priority. If you couldn't do preaching, then you sit down and chant extra rounds. But the real priority is to go out and distribute books. So on December the 3rd, 1975, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. I'd just joined his party the day before. And Prabhupada gave sannyas to three of his disciples. Lokanath, who was Indian, Prituputra, who was French, and Srila Maharaj, who was from Canada. So Prabhupada conducted the fire yajna this morning for the sannyas initiations of Lokanath, Sridhar and Prituputra in the temple courtyard. He gave a short talk based on the sannyas mantra, beginning Etam Sahastaya Paratma Nishtam from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He told them that although they are young men in the midst of the very powerful material energy, if they simply keep full faith in Krishna and follow the previous acharyas, they'll remain fixed up. He advised them to do this by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and he suggested that as sannyasis, they should also chant extra rounds. So describing the sannyas initiation as the last ceremonial procedure in the Varnashram system, and the sannyasi as the guru of the other social and spiritual orders, he told them to follow the examples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and preach all over the world. So that was an instance where Prabhupada recommended his disciples chant extra rounds. So on December the 19th, same year, 1975, Prabhupada was in Bombay, and whilst he was getting ready, I was sitting in the front room of his flat. In Bombay, we had these 6 apartment blocks that were part of the purchase deal, but they were all occupied by tenants, so we couldn't get them out. So then Prabhupada had an extra floor built on top of each 10 block, and he was staying on one side of the building and on the same floor, but on the other side of the central staircase, that's where the servants were. So in the morning, at about 5 o'clock, I was in Prabhupada's room, but what I was doing was going into the reception area, and I would sit down and chant. So Prabhupada was in the back, in his bedroom. He came out to brush his teeth, and the sink and the water was like in the same room as the reception area. So I came out into that front reception and sat down and started trying to chant my japa. So as I was chanting, I fairly quickly nodded off. And it just happened that whilst I was dozing, Prabhupada came into the room to do his teeth, and he saw me sleeping, so he had to wake me up. He wasn't angry, but he said, do not sit whilst you were chanting. Sitting means sleeping. So, being Prabhupada's servant, I sometimes find it difficult to chant good rounds because I'm expected to remain on call in the room adjacent to his throughout the day. I've had to learn how to chant almost silently so as not to disturb him, and that makes it more difficult to be attentive. Previous secretaries and servants have also had trouble chanting properly due to the demands of their engagement. So it was kind of, you had to juggle things, you had to get your rounds done, but at the same time Prabhupada's in the next room, so you don't want to chant too loudly in case it disturbs him. So it took a bit of practice to learn how to be there and be silent, and at the same time chant your rounds. So, sitting means sleeping. March the 1st, 1976, in Mayapur. I mentioned the other day that Prabhupada had this evening massage, and when I first was taught how to do that by Upendra, it seemed really easy. 10 minutes, and that was it. Prabhupada sent us out. But by the time we got to Mayapur a few months later, the evening massage has become very difficult to perform. It has been getting increasingly longer each night. Every evening after the pujaris fumigate Prabhupada's bedroom with incense to drive out the mosquitoes, and Nakadundabi Prabhu and I drape a large net around Prabhupada's bed. When Prabhupada lies down to take rest at about 10 p.m, the lights go out, I slip underneath the net and perch cross-legged at Prabhupada's side on the bed so that I can massage up and down his legs and feet as Prabhupada softly slumbers. Previously, the massage lasted between a half hour and 45 minutes, but here in Mayapur the sessions have been going on for an hour or longer. Tonight it went on for over 2 hours, the longest period ever, and I left Prabhupada's room just after midnight. So that was it was the difficult service to perform because you'd been up since 5 o'clock in the morning, busy all day. Then at night time you give Prabhupada his massage. Everybody else had gone to bed. There was this smoke all over the place to drive out the mosquitoes. It was warming up, and so naturally started nodding off also as massaging Prabhupada. So it was quite difficult. I find it very difficult to sit in the dark, sweating under the mosquito net, breathing air thick with incense smoke, with no breeze for relief, and not a sound save Prabhupada's soft snoring. It's difficult to stay awake on the job. Occasionally I do drift off, only to snap suddenly back into consciousness without knowing how long I'd been out. So you kind of drift off, nod off, and suddenly you're back up again, and you wouldn't know whether you'd been asleep for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, so you just had to keep on going. But tonight, by Krishna's, I had to think of a way of staying awake whilst I was massaging Prabhupada. But tonight, by Krishna's grace, I was able to stay awake by chanting different slokas within my mind. I remembered that in the Gita, Krishna had called Arjuna Gudikesh, the conqueror of sleep. So my little experience is giving me a glimpse of what a high degree of sense control is required to earn the title of Gudikesh. So I did manage for a few nights. Those days I used to know about 200 or 300 mantras, so I just went through everything that I knew and kept on chanting as I was massaging Prabhupada. It worked to some degree. So Other features of chanting, or effects of chanting. On January the 7th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Nellore. So we had gone there on the invitation of these two sisters. They owned some land there and they wanted to donate it to ISKCON. But they had some strictures on it, some conditions on it. When we got there, the reception was kind of strange. It was a bit slightly muted. It was like this, the two sisters, they greeted Prabhupada at their land, and they, kind of had a very impassive kind of attitude. So they welcomed Prabhupada, but it's more like it was more like a formality than out of any real enthusiasm. So they had proposed that they were going to, they had two parcels of land, and one parcel was not developed. They wanted to donate that to ISKCON. And then the other parcel of land, there was their bungalow, they had a house there. So that part of the land was to be given to ISKCON after the two ladies had died. So it seemed like a good opportunity, but it was very kind of a strange situation. It was almost like they were just tolerating us being there, but they weren't really interested. So seeing that, Prabhupada had told Mahamsa Swami, who was dealing in that area, he called him in and asked him for the deed of gift. He wanted to see what was in there. So they didn't have it in Nellore. They had to send it from Bombay. So on the last day that we were there, we finally, Prabhupada received this deed of gift certificate. Then when he read through it, and then he read the small print at the bottom, and it said that ISKCON had 3 years to complete the building there, and they had specified that they wanted a temple, a meditation hall, and some other things. So Prabhupada, when he read the deed of gift, then he saw at the bottom in small print that if ISKCON has not completed the buildings within 3 years, then the land would revert back to the sisters, and they could give it to anybody else who they liked. And it said, such as the Ramakrishna Mission in Calcutta. So as soon as Prabhupada saw that, he understood this was a ploy. Yeah, it was a trick, because Prabhupada said that in India now we're practically the only society that's building new temples. So they put down, they're associated with this Ramakrishna Mission. So he said, if we don't get the project completed within 3 years, somehow or another, by hook or by crook, they may prevent us from doing that. They get us to come in and do the basic structure, but then by finding some excuse, drive us out and then bring in the Ramakrishna Mission to complete it and have ownership of it. So Prabhupada wasn't very happy with that, obviously, and he told Mahamsa that now you speak with these ladies, explain to them that, a gift should never be retracted, and that they should remove these clauses from the deed of gift. Otherwise, he said, we won't build there. So Mahamsa tried for a month to persuade them, to give it without any conditions, and they refused. So Mahamsa reported that to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, all right, dig up the foundation stone. So even though the ceremony had been done, that was part of the visit, Prabhupada, when he heard what this deed of gift said, then he said, all right, just dig up the foundation stone, take it to Madras. Yeah, and we'll put it there for the temple in Madras. So I don't know what happened to that foundation stone, actually. but we did remove it from the land. 11 years later, when I was beginning working on publishing my diary, I went to Nellore, and I visited the house, visited the sisters, and when I went through the front gate, they had a driver, so he reported to the two ladies that were still living there that this ISKCON person has come. So they kept the door closed and they told me, "Go away, we don't want you here." So I told them, "Look, I've just come by train from Calcutta. There's no way I'm going to leave until I've had a chance to look over the land." I was, just trying to make my writing accurate, so I wanted to just refresh my mind what the house was and what the land was like. It was exactly the same as when Prabhupada had been there. No development, nothing growing, and the two, there were sisters, they were just, living in this house. So I was a little forceful, and then the car driver, he said, "All right, you can look around, but only for 10 minutes. So I scouted it out, and then I went off. But, that was 11 years after Prabhupada had been there. What happened was that when the people from Nellore, we had got a collection party, life membership party, and many people, on the promise of this temple being built, they had signed up as ISKCON life members. Then when we had to inform them that they're trying to cheat us, then all the local people became very angry on them. Yeah, they wanted ISKCON to come there, and then they could see that these people were trying to trick us. So anyway, it was just one of the features of being in India. Lots of people come forward, they want to give you land, but they have an ulterior motive for doing it. So Prabhupada would never accept land just face value. He would have somebody go there, check out the legalities, check out the land itself before he made a decision to accept any so-called gifts. So we had a few incidences like that, but the Nellore one was the outstanding one. Just as a side note, when we arrived and on the first day there, then it was about midday, so it was time for Prabhupada's massage. So they put us in a room on the ground floor of the building, and as I was giving Prabhupada his massage, then we heard some peculiar sounds. Prabhupada said, "What's that noise?" So I looked out from the veranda, and there was a place where they were keeping chickens. So, because Prabhupada, he had told us one time, he had written a play, and it was like a play off the Ramakrishna mission, and Prabhupada, instead of using the name Ramakrishna Mission, he called it the Murgi Mission, right? Because they're famous for keeping chickens, and they have no principles for eating or anything. So that Murgi Mission, Prabhupada was exposing that. So anyway, from that we understood that their meat, at least they eat meat, and I took a walk around the grounds, and I saw that they had a lot of tulsi plants growing. So I thought, well, that's nice, worshipping tulsi at least. But when I looked closer, the tulsi plants were in a row, and there was a Ram tulsi, then the Krishna tulsi, then a Ram, then a Krishna, then a Ram, Krishna, Ram, Krishna. So they'd gone, this Ram Krishna, even in the, growing the tulsis. I went around the back of the house, and then I saw there was another tulsi in a pot on a stand, and I forgot what I was going to say. So they had it in a pot, And you know, when you have these thick hedges, sometimes when you go to the parks, they make different shapes out of the trees or bushes that grow there. So this tulsi was actually clipped in such a way that it looked like a chicken. So anyway, it kind of warned us what to expect. So anyway, no, I've forgotten what the... Okay, anyway, so we were in Nellore on January the 7th, and we were talking in Prabhupada's room. Bhaktivedanta Swami, who was the GBC in the South Seas, he had written to Srila Prabhupada and explained that there was some managerial problems confronting him. He said the society in Fiji is being organized mainly by one family, Mr. Dayoji Punja and his brother, and gradually other people were becoming involved. So he had to legally register ISKCON. So Madhvisa wanted to make sure that all the trustees were conforming to Prabhupada's standards and following the regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds a day. So Mr. Punja is adhering to the principles, but one or two of the other present trustees are not, although they're very favourable and have given large donations of money. So Prabhupada requested, Madhvisa requested Prabhupada to ask them to personally stand down in favour of Dayoji's brother Karshanji. So Prabhupada knows that it's a sensitive issue. The impetus for the establishment of ISKCON in Fiji had arisen originally from Dayoji Punja and his brother's enthusiasm to have a temple in Fiji. So Prabhupada didn't want to act in such a way that it might strike them as being arbitrary. The problem was that some of the current trustees were not following the principles. So Madhvisa wanted to know, shall we leave it like that, or shall we ask them to step down? So Prabhupada wanted to kind of keep out of that level of negotiation and keep a friendly atmosphere with Dayoji and his family, because they were building the temple. So Prabhupada doesn't want to act in such a way it might strike people as arbitrary. So he advised Madhvisa to arrange everything locally with a consensus of agreement. He said if any of the trustees are to be dropped, that has to be discussed between the trustees themselves. These are all important men, and we should be careful lest they become offended. If I say something, it will not look well. If some of the trustees are not abiding by the principles and not chanting 16 rounds, then they should be induced by the other trustees who are following to step down. So I think you can follow what I mean. So that was indicative of how Prabhupada dealt with things, that he wanted these people to be involved, but on that level they had to be chanting 16 rounds. That was a managerial principle. Sometimes we don't associate chanting with management, but Prabhupada, obviously everything had to be done on a spiritual basis, and so that was his instruction, that if they're not chanting 16 rounds, they should step down as trustees, and other people should be appointed that are actually following. So January 18th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Mayapur. Madhvisa had flown in from Australia. They had done their business in Fiji, etc. And he wanted to spend a bit of time with Srila Prabhupada. So Madhvisa also asked a few managerial questions regarding ISKCON in Fiji. Dayoji Punja, who was instrumental in establishing ISKCON there, he's chanting the Maha Mantra and following the regulative principles. And he's channeling money from his supermarket and other shops into building a Krishna temple. But meanwhile, he is selling meat and liquor in the stores. So Madhavisa expressed uncertainty about whether to tell him to cease such sales or not. So the Punja family actually were one of the richest families on the island. They owned 2 or 3 stores. There was only one, what do you call it? There was only one supermarket, and that of course was carrying all different kinds of items, and they were selling liquor and they were selling meat. So Madhavisa was a bit uncertain how to deal with that. Should he, speak to them directly or just not say anything? So he expressed his uncertainty to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, don't interfere, they should be allowed to continue. They should not be forced to give it up. In the Bhagavad Gita, he said, every endeavor is covered by some sort of fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore, we should not give up the work which is born of one's nature, even if that work is full of fault. So Prabhupada expressed confidence that if these devotees are chanting, then these things will soon be properly adjusted. So Madhavisa didn't bring up the issue with them, but about a month later, Prabhupada was in correspondence with Dayoji, and Dayoji himself told Prabhupada that I have a difficulty because we've got this supermarket and we're selling all these illicit items, meat and fish and alcohol. So he said, I'm going to break up the business, that my brothers that want to keep that side of the operations, I'm going to give my share to them. I'll use my, when we sell it, then I'll use my share of the proceeds, and I want to open a prasadam restaurant and an ice cream company. So he did that on his own. Prabhupada's strategy, was that he had confidence that if they were chanting properly, then they get, to the point where they couldn't tolerate doing this illicit activity, and that's exactly what happened. So even in management, it's important to chant your rounds properly. January the 10th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Bombay. Yasamati Nandana, he had sent Prabhupada a letter. Prabhupada had been to Ahmedabad at the end of 1975 for 1 week, and they were looking for a suitable place to use as a temporary center until they could get some land and build a proper temple. So Yasamati Nandan, he was the chief man there in Gujarat, so he sent an update on his attempts to secure a suitable center in Ahmedabad. The building that he had shown Prabhupada a building just when we made the visit at the end of December, and Prabhupada gave approval to try to get it. So now Yasa was writing to say that building, on closer inspection, had several defects, and since he has located a much better place in the city centre, so he wasn't going to go ahead with the building that he showed to Srila Prabhupada. But he said the problem with the new place is that it's only available for an initial 3 months period. So the owners are thinking of using it for some charitable cause. So Prabhupada encouraged them to accept it despite the time limit. He said, even if you can only stay for 3 months, what's the loss? You can always look for another place. Now people are seeing how genuine our movement is, so they're coming forward to offer us so many places. So we simply have to maintain our strict principles and keep ourselves pure. Otherwise, there are so many bogus institutions doing business in the name of God and simply cheating people. So we have to be careful not to to degenerate like these others. Our strength lies or depends upon regular chanting of the 16 rounds and rigidly adhering to the regulated principles. So again, Prabhupada's stressing, you can't do anything unless you're actually following the principles. You have to be chanting 16 rounds. Then, you can do so much preaching. But if people hear you preaching but you're not practicing, then that's an example they won't follow. So that's a little bit about chanting in regard to management. Some of the odd japa pastimes. When Prabhupada got to Detroit in 1976 in June, then the devotees had set up one room for Prabhupada's use, and as we were settling in, then Prabhupada was walking up and down chanting his japa. So myself and Pushta Krishna, we were staying in the room next door. So as soon as we arrived, I got into Prabhupada's room, made sure everything was set up properly. Whilst Prabhupada was walking up and down, chanting his japa, then all of a sudden he stopped. He looked down, he said, "What is this?" So the devotees had covered the carpets with white sheets, and we do that in India quite a lot. You get these duries, and we used to cover them with white sheets because it was easy to clean them. Just remove them and then put another one in the next day. So the devotees had tried their best, to provide an equal facility in Detroit, and they had put these white sheets down, and whoever did it wasn't thinking properly. They took where the two edges of the sheets were, they fastened them together with pins. So there was this, seam going through the whole thing, and it was pinned together. So Prabhupada was walking up and down and trod on one of the pins. Fortunately, it didn't pierce his skin, but Prabhupada, he said they have no brain. So I had to pull all the pins out. So another incident with chanting. In January 77, Prabhupada went to Jagannath Puri. We actually went to open the Bhubaneswar temple, but some of the devotees, they thought, well, we're so near to Jagannath Puri, that must be, a better deal if we go there instead of spending money in Bhubaneswar. Let's spend it and get a good place in Jagannath Puri. Because the problem in Jagannath Puri was that they didn't like non-Hindus. So Prabhupada said, well, if they won't let us into their temple, then we'll build our own. So he agreed to go to Puri for a day or 2 days so we could see what land was available. So Gagamuni Swami, he took Prabhupada around. He did a bit of investigation. And there were 2 or 3 plots of land. So one of them was just sand. There was another couple of plots with buildings on. So Prabhupada looked at them all, and he didn't come to any conclusion at that time, but he said if we can get a suitable place, we will build a temple in Jagannath Puri. So whilst he was there, we arrived in the morning of the 25th, and we stayed overnight, and we got a room, or a couple of rooms, in a place called the Tourist Bungalow. So it was like a seaside place. So we stayed there overnight. And whilst Prabhupada was there, this gentleman came. He was a pujari from the main temple. So he came, he heard that Prabhupada was in town, and he wanted to talk to him. So his name was Saba Shiva Rat. So he came in the afternoon on the 26th, and it was a friendly meeting. Prabhupada asked him if he could chant the Jagannath Ashtakam, and of course he could, so he had the man chant the Jagannath Ashtakam, and we recorded that. Then afterwards, Prabhupada told us that we should all learn to chant these prayers to Lord Jagannath. So the reason why Sadashivarat came was because the following day he was inaugurating a new book, something to do with the Bhagavatam, but it was written in Aryan language. So he was having some function on the afternoon of the 26th, and obviously he thought this is a good an advantage that these foreign devotees, they're in Puri and Prabhupada's in Puri. If I can get him to, do the keynote speech, that will advertise the book more and it will draw more people to this small panel that they'd made, come and see the white elephants. So Prabhupada agreed that he would inaugurate the book. So we stayed overnight, and then the next day then we went with Sadashivarat to the area where he was having his pandal and official opening. So there was, I think, about 15 or 20 devotees there. And the locals had set up this small pandal, and there was a number of their pujaris and pandas were sitting on the stage. So Prabhupada arrived by car and walked over, and then they invited him, please sit down on the stage. So Prabhupada sat down, and then Sadashivarat asked him, can you say something about the book? So Prabhupada looked at the book, he put it down, and then he spoke for half an hour about why his disciples should be allowed into the temple. So they wanted to use Prabhupada's presence for their purpose, but Prabhupada had his own purpose. So he just told them, he said, he said, his name is Jagannath. Yeah, it's not Ariyanath or Purinath. Yeah, so if the people from the Jagat, if they want to come and see the Lord, why are you stopping them? He said, you should let them all in. All my disciples are genuine Vaishnavas. So Prabhupada used it as a platform for pushing his agenda. So after 25 or 30 minutes, Prabhupada finished up his talk. I was sitting, on the sand in front of him. We all were. And Prabhupada looked down at me, he said, so, let's go. So he started standing up. Sadashivarat, he said, the book, you have to inaugurate the book. So Prabhupada had totally ignored it up to that point. So then when Sadashivarat started to panic a little bit, Prabhupada picked up the book. He said, so they say this is the book of such and such a person. Today it is inaugurated. And that was it. We put the book down and off we went. It happened where the plot of land was, where the pandal was being held. At the side of that, there was one of Prabhupada's godbrothers' temples. So it was about 7 in the evening, it had gotten dark. We walked across, and the temple was, deserted. There was nothing happening. They had one 25-watt bulb, light bulb, hanging in the deity room, so you could barely see the deities. And we went into the courtyard, so we started chanting and having a, Wampa Stompa Kirtan, as we used to say. So that brought out the pujaris. They were happy to see us, and they kept the temple open whilst we were there. So after 10 or 15 minutes, then we stopped chanting and left that place, and we went to another Gaudiya mat that Prabhupada had one friend there. What was his name? He was Dr. Jagannath. I have to look it up anyway. This friend of his, he used to send like a small amount of Jagannath prasadam in an envelope to Srila Prabhupada. And he did that 4 or 5 times whilst we were on tour. Prabhupada would get these envelopes, there'd be 3 or 4 grains of Jagannath prasadam inside the envelope. So they were nice, good friends. So Prabhupada went to visit him in Jagannath Puri. Then from there, we went back to, we went back to the hotel. From there, then we went back to Bhubaneswar. So on the way back to Bhubaneswar, of course, there's that Shakshi Gopal temple. If anybody's been there, they're like he's 6 foot tall. It's big. So that's the Shakshi Gopal that's mentioned in the story in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I don't know how he came to come back to Orissa, but he was there. And so somebody mentioned, we're going through Shakshi Gopal. So we asked Prabhupada, can we see the deity? So Prabhupada was agreeable. We pulled into the temple compound. Prabhupada got out of the car. Guru Kripa and his men were there, so they were following up. And the way the temple was designed, the deity room was up on a plinth. You had to go up 2 sets of stairs, brick stairs, concrete stairs, until you got to the deity room. So when we started to go up, some of the pandas came out and they said, no, go around the side. So we went around the side, and then they opened up, the rooms where their Utsav Murtis were being kept. But the actual Murti of Shakshi Gopal was up on the top plinth. So they tried to trick us, that this is where the deities are at the side. So Guru Kripa and his men, they said, that's not Shakshi Gopal, we want to see the real deity. So we started to go up the side, and then a few of the pandas came back with some lathis, bamboo lathi, and they were going to stop us from going up. So it was becoming very tense, because Prabhupada was right there, standing right there, in the middle of his men. So, it got a little bit heated. And then one gentleman, I guess he was the head pujari, he came out from his room inside. He saw that Prabhupada was there. So immediately he stopped his men, let them come up. So we went up onto the top plinth where the deity room was. And they allowed Srila Prabhupada to actually come into the deity room. So Gopal Krishna, myself, Guru Kripa, we also squeezed in. We were, like just a foot away from Shakshi Gopal. So we got a good darshan, and, the temple itself there was water all over the floor. I don't know why. So we put that on our heads. And then all the pujaris were, behind us looking and seeing what was going on. And just as Prabhupada turned to leave, they said, money, you have to give some money. You have to give a donation. So Guru Kripa handed Prabhupada a 50 rupee note, which in those days was a lot. If if Prabhupada went to visit a temple, he would give like 5 rupees or 10 rupees best. So 50 rupees was a lot of money. So Prabhupada took the 50 rupees, he handed it to the head pujari. The other pujaris are straining over to see how much. I mean, they were just shameless, completely shameless. So Prabhupada, when they saw it was 50, they said, only 50 rupees, he's only giving 50 rupees. Because the Westerners were there, they were hoping they were going to get a lot of money. So without engaging in any further conversation, Prabhupada just turned around and walked out. And we went with him. And as we went down the steps to get to the car, there was a couple of the pujaris that were running after us and saying, you have to give more, 50 rupees is not enough. So Prabhupada just ignored them, got in the car, and then we drove out of the compound there. The funny thing was that when we entered into the temple, when we first arrived, there was a sign up above the gate. This is the deity of Shakshi Gopal, and no money is required. So, on the entranceway they're saying no money is required, and I thought, well, if it's not required, then why even bother mentioning it? People will just go there and do whatever they like. But the fact that they mentioned that we don't, take money for darshan, meant I thought, well, that means that they do. It's kind of like reverse psychology. They were, advertising one thing but doing another. Anyway, so we left that place. Prabhupada was quite disgusted, but he did make one comment. he said that the Shakshi Gopal deity is not properly dressed. And that was all he said about that incident. Anyway, so to come back to our story, when we were in Puri, Prabhupada invited Sadashiva Rat to come to our temple opening in foundation stone ceremony in Bhubaneswar. So it was like a reciprocal arrangement. Prabhupada went to inaugurate his book, and he came to Bhubaneswar to participate and be one of the guests at the foundation stone ceremony. So that was held on Nityananda's appearance day, February the 2nd. So in the early evening, we had a morning program, and then Prabhupada went back to his rooms, and then there was again a second function in the evening. So in the early evening, we went back into the pandal, and this time instead of speaking himself, Prabhupada asked Sadashiva Rat to deliver a lecture. So there was a small stage. Prabhupada's Vyasa was on one side. He was sitting there watching, the Sadashiva Rat. Sadashiva Rat was giving the lecture, and Guru Kripa and about half a dozen of his men, Sankirtan men, they were sitting directly behind him. So he started to give his lecture, and he went on and on and on and on. It was starting to get, a bit tedious. After about half an hour, Prabhupada, expected he was going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, but he got into it. He's rattling off all these verses, and we didn't know what he was saying. But anyway, we were just sitting down on the platform. So after about half an hour, Guru Kripa's men started getting a bit restless. Guru Kripa took out his bead bag, and he started chanting japa, and not just like silently, As soon as he pulled them out, he started chanting really loudly, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, like this. And as he started doing that, he looked over to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was, deliberately not looking over at him. He could hear it, what they were doing. So he just kept looking ahead. He just, So Guru Kripa took it, Prabhupada's, not going to stop us. They thought Prabhupada's approving that we bring this to an end. And he did, actually. But so Sadashiva, after about 2 minutes, he started to realize there's a half a dozen brahmacharis sitting behind him, and they're all chanting, the japa as loud as they can. So he finally took the hint and brought his talk to a close. So, as I say, Prabhupada didn't say anything. So then we had a kirtan, and then Prabhupada went back into his rooms. So after 5 minutes, Guru Kripa came into Prabhupada's room, and he asked Prabhupada, if this, he said, is that the etiquette, that they're chanting loudly on their beads whilst this man was speaking. So he was grinning all over, and Prabhupada was smiling. And, Prabhupada told him, he said, well, it's better that you let them speak. After all, he is a learned scholar. He spoke so many things, but there was no conclusion. He's a householder, after all. So, in other words, he's a householder. He's like a professional talker, on the Bhagavatam or whatever. And when they speak, they just, flowery language, quote verses, but they actually don't know the philosophy. So this man was, going on and on and on. And Prabhupada said, well, it's not surprising, he's a householder. That's how they earn their money. They go to different functions and chant some mantras and do some pujas, and they get paid for it. So it's like an occupation. So he wasn't at all upset with Guru Kripa. So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about chanting japa. I mentioned yesterday that when Prabhupada got really, really sick, then he wasn't able to chant his japa anymore, at least for a few months. So there were some occasions, because when Prabhupada was strict about making sure the devotees chanted their 16 rounds. We always mentioned that. But there were some incidences where Prabhupada allowed the devotees to forego that requirement. So Prabhupada himself was one example. Another example, there was 2 or 3 incidences with his disciples in London in 1969, I think it was, when they installed Radha London Ishwara. So Srila Sundar Prabhu, who of course was amongst the first devotees to go to London from San Francisco. So he was working so hard that he wasn't chanting his rounds. He'd get up early in the morning and go out and do his business, trying to organize the opening of the London temple, and they had the deities to install, etc. So he just couldn't find the time to chant his rounds. So some of the devotees noted that, and they went to see Srila Prabhupada, and they said, well, Shamashunda Prabhu is not chanting his rounds. The Prabhupada said, that's all right, it doesn't matter, let him keep on working, because he knew he was the key man in, finding that temple and opening it up. So he was quite sympathetic to Shamasunda's kind of predicament, and he said to the devotees, don't disturb him, he's working for, the whole day and night. And Prabhupada also told Shamasunda that Arjuna also was not chanting because he was fighting a war. So there's some exceptional circumstances where Prabhupada kind of overlooked the fact that some of his disciples weren't chanting the 16 rounds. So there was a devotee called Ajitananda. He sent a letter to Prabhupada. This was January in 1976. And Prabhupada replied to him. He said, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated November 25th. 1976, he said, concerning your problem, I will advise you to chant on your lips, since you are becoming tired chanting out loud. So this boy had written to Prabhupada, I can't chant so many rounds of japa. So, and the excuse he was using was that somehow or another his lips were freezing up or something. So Prabhupada says, since you are becoming tired to chant out loud, so you just sit and do it. He said also you can sit near your god brothers chanting, and you can also hear the tapes. So with all of these options, there should be no problem. So he said that, okay, if you can't chant your 16 rounds, then you sit where other people are chanting, you'll hear them chanting, and that'll be as good as you chanting yourself. Or if you like, you can get a tape of somebody chanting and listen to the tape. But somehow or another, you have to do your 16. So he was giving him a concession there. So there was another devotee, early devotee, that was also having trouble chanting. That was Gagamuni Prabhu, because he joined with Brahmananda. They were brothers. Brahmananda, Prabhupada said, he was a saintly person practically from birth. Even his own mother recognized this boy as, he's a very religious person. So she was expecting he might become a priest or something like that. So Gagamuni was just the opposite. Brahmananda, he was warm, friendly, he liked chanting. He was Prabhupada's secretary. Gagamuni, Prabhupada once joked that Gagamuni, so Garga means a pot, right? Is that Garga? That's the name for a pot. So he was very expert at collecting money. So Prabhupada used to call him Gagamuni, jug of money, because he could collect a lot of money. So that's kind of like the difference between the two. But Gagamuni loved Srila Prabhupada. He stuck with him even though he wasn't following strictly. And on March the 8th, 1976, the GBC meetings had been held. Prabhupada was there. And Prabhupada had written in the early morning, Prabhupada called in Tamal Krishna Goswami into his room. He had just been made the GBC chairman. So he told him that Madhvisa Swami should be made the vice chairman of the GBC for that year, and that Gargamuni Swami should be given GBC responsibility. So Tamal Krishna replied that the GBC had already considered Gargamuni to be added to the GBC, but they decided not to appoint him because he was not regularly chanting on his rounds. Some of Gargamuni's men also had left his party, complaining that his devotional standard was not very strict. So Prabhupada said that despite this, he should still be made a GBC member. He said the reason was that Gargamuni had creative energy. He was a very active person. He was always thinking about how to make money, basically. So, Prabhupada had him in charge of the Calcutta temple, and he was collecting lots of money. So Prabhupada said, now you make him a GBC, but he wasn't really strictly following. So Prabhupada said, it doesn't matter, he's got this creative energy, and if that's not used constructively, then it will, he'll become frustrated and misapply it. So just to keep him properly engaged, then he agreed that he could not chant his rounds. And also there was a letter to Gargamuni, I think in like the early 1970s, he'd written to Prabhupada and he admitted that I can't chant 16 rounds a day. So Prabhupada gave him a concession. He said, all right, you can chant 8 rounds a day, but not less than that. So he was willing in some circumstances to be a little flexible. So another person who somehow or another was not chanting his rounds, that was Bhaktivedanta Das. He was from New York. He was a very active man. He had a very good brain. He was an expert speaker, and he was a good organizer. So he had been in Bhubaneswar helping Bhaktivedanta Swami to inaugurate that temple there. But he was running around here and there all day and night collecting and so many things. So he wasn't chanting his rounds. He couldn't get them done. So when we were after the foundation stone ceremony in Bhubaneswar, Prabhupada oversaw that. About 1,000 people came during the day to take prasadam. Sadashiva Rat attended and did his speech. And Prabhupada had his disciple Swarup Damodar speak also. He had arrived the day before. Prabhupada wanted him to speak on a scientific level to the people that were attending. So later on, Prabhupada then had a discussion with his disciples how to manage the Bhubaneswar center. Govinda Maharaj had previously written to Srila Prabhupada that I'm sitting on this land, there's nothing here, there's no buildings here, no running water, no electricity. He said, I'm on my own. Sometimes the Western devotees come, but then after a week or two, they don't like it, so they go away again. So what to do? I have no manpower, I have no money, so I'm just sitting here and chanting, that's all I can do. So Bhagavat came for the opening, so Prabhupada suggested that he stay there with Govinda Maharaj and help him to organize, because he was a good manager. And then Maharaj would be free to translate his books, Prabhupada's books, into Aryan. So he did go there. He spent some time there. And then on the foundation stone ceremony day, then Prabhupada called him into his room. So Prabhupada discussed with his disciples about how to manage the Bhubaneswar center. Some of the sannyasis admitted to Prabhupada that they did not see much potential there. So Prabhupada said, why not? This is the capital of Orissa. People are coming here. So we have to have centers in every town. Even if it's not a big center, still some have to work and stay here. Even if the people are coming every night only to eat the khichdi, that is also preaching. So they'd started a food distribution program. And they're mainly poor people from around the local district, but they started coming just to get this cup of khichdi every night. So Prabhupada said, that's also preaching. So one of the devotees said that it was too far our land was too far from the town, and Orissa was too poor to build a big temple. And they thought that a better idea might be to try and build a big temple in Jagannath Puri. So Prabhupada replied that to build in Jagannath Puri was all right, but the Bhubaneswar land was also important. Prabhupada's Aryan disciple, Govinda Maharaj, told Prabhupada that as soon as the annual India pilgrimage was over, all the devotees would leave, and he would be left alone with just one or two brahmacharis. So he was particularly suited to translating Prabhupada's books into Oriya. So he asked Prabhupada to give him some help by sending some brahmacharis there. So Prabhupada listened to that. So then he said, where is the fat one? So Bhagavat was a big guy. I mean, he's over 6 feet tall, but he was very large around the waist. In fact, the year previously, he had come to see Prabhupada in Delhi, and he had asked if he could take sannyas. So Prabhupada at that time dissuaded him. Not right now, later on we'll see. When he went out of the room, Prabhupada made this comment. He said, one should be fit, not fat. So he let it, he left that for the time being. So now a year later, Bhagavat's in Orissa there. Prabhupada needs somebody to manage. So he said, so where is the fat one? So bring him here. So a devotee ran out to fetch Bhagavat. At the time the devotee found him, Bhagavat was sitting in the visitor's tent telling other devotees about plans that he had made to go to New York. So he got some idea that he would preach in New York. They'd just got that 11-story building that we had on West 55th Street. So when he heard that Prabhupada wanted to see him, he assumed that it was in connection with his going to New York. So when he he assumed it was in connection with the cornerstone ceremony, since he was in charge. But as soon as he entered Prabhupada's rooms, he sensed that something heavy was about to happen. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're going in and out of Prabhupada's room just ordinarily, but sometimes when you walked in, you knew something was going on. So as soon as he walked in, the few sannyasis were there, Guru Kripa and others, and as soon as he walked in, he could understand something's happening here. This is not just, an ordinary call from Prabhupada. So Prabhupada smiled and he asked Bhagavat, how are you? I'm fine, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada came straight to the point. He said, so how would you like to stay here and manage this place? So Bhagavat immediately, he got it. So Prabhupada asked him, could you stay here and manage this and build this building? So Bhagavat said, I could, but it's very difficult, and I was all set to go to New York. So he began to excitedly tell Prabhupada about a telegram that he'd received from the temple president in New York, Adi Keshava Swami, inviting him to come there and head up an important preaching department in the temple. So Prabhupada said, New York? They have too many men in New York already. You don't have to go to New York. You should stay here. So Bhagavat objected. He said he couldn't work with Gargamuni Swami, who was the GBC man for that area. So Prabhupada replied that he was sending Gargamuni to Bangladesh, so he wouldn't be in charge of ISKCON in Orissa anymore. So Prabhupada Prabhupada said that he would personally supervise Bhagavat. So Bhagavat's next objection was that his health wasn't good and he had to sleep a lot. So he was trying to desperately find some reason for, not having to stay in Bhubaneswar. So Prabhupada said, oh, well, this is a very healthy place. So if you're sick, you can stay here for your health. He said, you can simply go out in the field to pass stool and wash with your lota, and afterwards you clean the lota with the mud, and then you can bathe with the same lota. So in this way you can stay clean and healthy. So Bhagavat then raised his ultimate objection. He said, Srila Prabhupada, to tell you the truth, I'm not chanting my rounds. So Prabhupada, let's see, he said, I'm not chanting my rounds, so I think I'd better go to New York because there's good association there and I can become strong in my practicing my regulations. So Prabhupada said, that's all right, you're working very hard. So if sometimes you're not chanting your rounds, that's all right. As long as you were working hard, you can do your rounds at another time. So Prabhupada was not going to let him off the hook. So Bhagavat said, well, Prabhupada, according to the Gurvastakam, I can understand that whatever pleases you pleases Krishna. So Prabhupada smiled, he said, yes. So he said, so if you want me to stay here, then I think I should stay. So he conceded. So Prabhupada said, yes, I want you to stay here. You make life members, build this building, and help manage the place. So although Prabhupada had laid the cornerstone for the temple, the center had no funds or donors and no established congregation. So all the devotees had was their faith in Krishna. So on Prabhupada's say-so, and Bhagavat stayed there for a number of years. And he did well. He got the whole temple built and did a lot of preaching there. So another devotee that was not chanting, there was a gentleman called Vibhu Chaitanya, that was his initiated name. When I was the temple commander in Vrindavan, after the Vrindavan temple opening, I'd gone back to Australia and then come back to India again. They made me the temple commander. So that was like around September of 1975. So whilst I was there as the temple commander, any new devotees that wanted to join, I would have them stay with me in my room in the Brahmachari ashram for at least two weeks, so that I could see, what they were capable of and whether they were sincere. So one older gentleman, I guess in those days he must have been about 50, 55, something like that. So he turned up and he was initiated a short while later, Vibhu Chaitanya Das. So he was an expert cook. Actually, he'd seen Prabhupada in Mayapur and expressed his desire to join ISKCON. So Prabhupada told him, all right, you go to our Vrindavan temple. He was a Bengali. You go to our Vrindavan temple and you never leave. You stay there and you never leave. And he was there for like 25 or 30 years. He never once went out of our temple compound at the Krishna Balaram Mandir, except right at the very end when he got really, really seriously ill. So the devotees persuaded him, let us take you to the doctor. He didn't want to go, because Prabhupada had told him, don't leave the temple under any circumstance. But they were pressing, so they took him one time. When they brought him back, then he said, never again. You let me leave. Let me stay in the temple. I'll leave whenever Krishna desires. So anyway, the story with him was that he was an expert cook. So as soon as he arrived, once he got second initiation, he took over the deity kitchen. So in Vrindavan temple, they have this small kitchen where they cook just for the deities. All the other cooking is done in another section. So Vibhu Chaitanya literally was cooking every offering every day. I mean, he was, that dedicated. And he used to sing this sweet bhajans as he was cooking. So that kitchen, it kind of bridges over between the building in Prabhupada's rooms and the main temple. So that was part of the parikrama path. So if you walked around, you would go underneath where they were cooking. So as we were going around, Prabhupada was there, and he stopped. He said, "Who is that singing?" And the devotees told him, "That's Vibhu Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada." He said, "Oh, very nice." So he was very happy with him cooking and singing, but he wasn't chanting his rounds. So that was also told to Prabhupada that, well, he does so much service, but he never chants his rounds. Prabhupada said it doesn't matter, he's fully engaged. So he gave him permission to not chant as long as he carried on with his service. So he was there for like 20, 25 years. Wonderful devotee, completely pure-hearted, simple man, but expert at whatever he did. So Prabhupada was very happy with him. Then another devotee that was having problems chanting, that was Govardhan Prabhu. He was the temple president in our Detroit center. So Detroit, of course, that center was purchased for us by Ambarish Prabhu. And so Govardhan was in charge, but at the same time, again, he couldn't get all his rounds done. So eventually, the GBC decided, if you can't chant your rounds, how can you be the temple president? So just before Prabhupada arrived in Detroit in 1976 on his last tour, then Govardhan was removed as the temple president, and Madhavananda Prabhu, he was put in. So when Prabhupada came, he expected to see Govardhan, but instead Madhavananda was there. So he didn't say anything the week that we was there. He never brought it up as an issue. But when we left and we went on to Toronto, then Prabhupada called Jagadish. He was the GBC for that area. And he asked him, "Where is Govardhan? Why is he not at the temple?" So he explained, well, Govardhan admitted that he's not chanting his 16 rounds. So we had no real choice. We had to have somebody that's actually following the principles in charge of the temple. So they discussed, and Prabhupada told him, he said, he is the key to Ambarish's pocket. Because he was, good friends with Ambarish. And so Prabhupada said, you immediately put him back. He said, if he's not chanting his rounds, and you talk with him and persuade him that you should chant your rounds. But he said, put him back in charge. So Prabhupada replaced Madhavananda back with Govardhan. So again, Prabhupada was being very practical. Another devotee that was having difficulties chanting their rounds was Pradyumna's wife, Arundhati. So she was Prabhupada's typist, and she was very expert at typing. In 1976, actually, she joined Prabhupada's party. She'd been in LA when Prabhupada got there. She'd come to see him because she wasn't satisfied, her and Pradyumna. They weren't satisfied that their son, Aniruddha, who was about 6, I think, at that time, that he was getting a proper education at the Gurukul in Los Angeles. He was 6 years old and he still couldn't chant from 1 to 10. So they were very unhappy with that. So Prabhupada had Pradyumna traveling with him as his Sanskrit editor. So then he said, all right, your wife can come and bring Aniruddha as well. She can do homeschooling. So the family actually joined Prabhupada's party, and they stayed with Prabhupada from about June of 1976 until his disappearance in November the following year. So the whole family were traveling with Prabhupada. So anyway, earlier than that, Arundhati in 1969, she just joined. She was an expert typist. They were just setting up ISKCON Press at that time, which later on became the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. So they had purchased what they called a composer machine. Yeah, so some kind of machine that I'm not exactly sure what it was doing, but composing, the dictations of Srila Prabhupada and putting it on a tape. I mean, the computers in those days were very simple compared to what we have now. But anyway, they bought this composing machine. So I think what it did was it printed out text, and then the layout person would get those printouts cut them down, and then stick them on the page. Then that was photographed, and then that was sent to the printer, and then the printers would, work from the photograph. So the composition machine was, the first part of that process. So they got this composing machine, and Prabhupada replied a letter from Arundhati, and he told her that when the composer machine is purchased, you will be engaged from 11 until 3 p.m. and then from 7 until 10 p.m. So that means 7 hours a day. When you're typing, you should know that it is as good as chanting, because the work is also in the matter of Krishna. So chanting on the beads and chanting on the typewriter, both are transcendental sounds of Krishna's name. So Krishna's name, fame and qualities, all of them are on the absolute platform, and therefore there's no difference between one service and another. So don't be misled that you are typing and not chanting. So, Prabhupada had things that he needed to be done. If the devotees that he wanted to do them, couldn't do it or had excuses, whatever you said, Prabhupada would work around it and come to the conclusion that you should do what Prabhupada told you. Like Bhagavad, he had so many excuses, but Prabhupada expertly adjusted. All right, if you're sick, stay here. It's very healthy if you stay here. So Arundhati was also in that category. So Prabhupada told her there's no difference between typing and chanting. Typing is chanting. All right, so that's what I've got as far as chanting the japa. That's the individual chanting that Prabhupada mentioned in that pamphlet that he took to America. His mission was to get people individually and as a group chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So that's a few examples of, the history of chanting japa as Prabhupada introduced it. Now the next section is about kirtan. So japa is individual, kirtan is with everybody. So Prabhupada was in Bombay in April of 14th, 1976, and he was speaking on the Bhagavatam. Finished with that. Let me just catch up here. So he explained that when you chant in the Dham, it has 1,000 times more potency than anywhere else. So Prabhupada was giving an evening darshan. So he was up on the roof. He was enjoying the warm atmosphere by sitting out on the roof. We take up an asana for Prabhupada with pillows and mattresses, just in case any guests also come. Generally, a few people do come, so Prabhupada has a chance to relax, although he's always keen to preach. So during the evening session, Prabhupada told a visitor that the potency of chanting done in the temple is increased 1,000 times compared to that done elsewhere. Therefore, so many people like to go to places like Vrindavan just to chant, because they know that there's some special potency there. So later on, February the 16th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Mayapur. So in the early morning, I went into Prabhupada's room. He was listening appreciatively to the 24-hour kirtan that was going on in the temple room. That was one of the strictures that Prabhupada put down when he started the Vrindavan temple and also the Mayapur temple. He said that we should have 24-hour kirtan going on there perpetually. So we did that in Vrindavan when it was first opened. I mentioned that as the temple commander I had to kind of organize that. It wasn't very easy, but we did it. Later on they stopped doing it for a while, after a couple of years. And Prabhupada agreed, all right, if it's too difficult then don't do it. But his preference was that they did it. Later on, Indra Prabhu came to Vrindavan, and one of the first things that he did was restart the 24-hour kirtan. So that fortunately is going on even now, so that he managed to establish that. in Mayapur, right from the very beginning. They had 24-hour kirtan. They were living in that bamboo cottage, Prabhupada's Bhajan Kutir, and singing from there. And up to date, so far, they haven't stopped. So that's also going on 24 hours a day. So that was, Prabhupada was very happy. The devotees coming, if they just came and chanted, then that was, Prabhupada was satisfied with that. So this particular morning, mid-February, I was in Prabhupada's room, and he was listening appreciatively to the 24-hour kirtan. He said, this kirtan should never stop. It must go on 24 hours a day. This is the beauty of this movement. This is the life of this movement. So Prabhupada gave that instruction, and they followed it. So later, 1 month later, Prabhupada was still in Mayapur, March the 19th, 1976. Mayapur is again peaceful. Most of the pilgrims have returned home. This was just after Gopurnima. Most of our devotees have left, and work has recommenced on building the new building. So that building that they were building at that time, that was what we call the Long Building. Yeah, I think anybody who's been to Mayapur has seen that. When they built it, it was said to be the longest building in Bengal. And Prabhupada had initiated that building the month before. He was walking up and down the land. We had bought some more plots of land. So we had one stretch of land from the roadside all the way back. So Prabhupada saw it, immediately he said, all right, now build a guest house and rooms along the entire length of the boundary. So they immediately started. They got about half of it finished by the time that the devotees arrived for the festival. And by the following year, of course, it was complete. So this is the time when Prabhupada was there. In 1976, Prabhupada was sitting quietly in his room, relishing the blissful atmosphere created by the melodic Bengali kirtan, which was floating out from the temple room below. He told us that chanting is the only solace. It is nothing material. He even suggested that 500 men at a time could come here to Mayapur simply to chant. So when I heard Prabhupada say that, groups, I was thinking, where are we going to get 500 devotees from to come and chant? But now when you go, there's thousands of people coming in, and even in Mangalarti sometimes, a whole village, they'll come by bus overnight, they park opposite the temple, and when it's 4 o'clock they go and bathe, and then they go to Mangalarti. So, the ISKCON Mangalarti is famous, and thousands of people come there continuously. So Prabhupada's vision, to have huge groups of devotees come and chant, that was also fulfilled. So chanting Hare Krishna in Mayapur was not commonly done before Srila Prabhupada opened ISKCON Center there. So one evening massage, Prabhupada was sitting very quietly, and then from the other side of the river, you could hear the sounds of this kirtan coming, and they were chanting Hare Krishna. So Prabhupada told me, he said, before we came here, you would never have heard this. They never chant Hare Krishna, but because we're here and they've seen what can be done, now they're starting to chant. So he was very happy that he was having that, our movement was having that effect, not just on places abroad, but in the very center of our spiritual activity in Mayapur. So another form of preaching on Padayatra. Yeah. So Rupanuga, he wrote to Srila Prabhupada in April of 1970, and he said something about public chanting. So Prabhupada replied him. He said that the Sankirtan party was programmed long, long ago. He said, even when I was in India, he's talking about his own efforts. He said, when there was talk about preaching amongst our God brothers, I used to say to my God brothers that when I would begin preaching, I will take 2 trucks, one for the Sankirtan party for carrying all the requisites, and I would go from village to village throughout the whole world, preaching Lord Chaitanya's message. So the time has come, as per my dream, by the grace of Krishna, that you were carrying on this program. So they gotten some means for moving around and preaching. Please therefore organize this Sankirtan party as you are doing from one school or college to another. Then we can rightly impress the Krishna Consciousness ideas on some intelligent students' hearts, and that will be a great service. So they were just starting some kind of college preaching program. Prabhupada encouraged them, he liked that very much. Go there, any intelligent person, if they hear you chanting, then you talk to them, and then they'll become devotees. So he's very happy about that. There was, let's see. So, as he said there, I had a plan to get 2 trucks and travel all over India. That was in the 1950s. Prabhupada wanted to go out and preach actively, but unfortunately none of his God brothers would give him any support. So he was in Jhansi for a while, then he was in Vrindavan. He had this idea for traveling Sankirtan, but he couldn't find anybody to do it with him. Later on, of course, when the Western devotees started coming, then he was able to expand things and fulfill this desire of traveling Sankirtan. So December 24th, 1975, Prabhupada was in Bombay, and the following day we were going to fly up to Ahmedabad and go to a village called Sanand. And there was the king of Sanand, and he had invited, he was in the habit of inviting sadhus to come to his town, and then he would set them up with a pandal and they would speak. So he heard about ISKCON, so he offered, you come up to Ahmedabad and Sanand and we'll have some programs there. So Prabhupada was very happy to do that. So I spent the day packing, preparing for the following day's trip. Several village programs have been arranged, and Prabhupada is very enthusiastic. He stressed the importance of preaching in the villages, telling Hansadutta, Harikesh and myself that he had a long-cherished desire to preach from village to village throughout India. He said that prior to coming to the West, he was unable to do it, but now he is getting the opportunity to fulfill this desire because he's got some men. So the next day we flew up to Ahmedabad, and they had a couple of cars there. Prabhupada got in the first car. They drove him to Sanand. We had to wait for a few minutes for our vehicle, and we got a little bit separated. The drive took about an hour and went through the main parts of the town and up to a central thoroughfare leading to the palace. So it was a wonderful reception. As soon as we arrived there, they had some set up like a pandal at the side of the town. Prabhupada was brought from the car to sit on the pandal. The king of Sanand came out. He was like the epitome of the, portly monarch of India. They have on Air India Airlines, they have a motif, a little fat guy with a big bushy beard and a turban on his. So actually this king was dressed like that. He had some fancy ties around his waist, and he was very happy. The devotees came. He set up this reception. They had this stick dance that they do. Everybody holds a stick and dances around. So they had a whole troop of them banging on their sticks and everything. Gujarat, they do that, I think. And then after that, then he invited Prabhupada to come and sit on a chariot. So they had this silver coated chariot with one horse. And the king of Sanand sat on one side. Prabhupada sat opposite him on the other side. I was up behind Prabhupada on, where the servants stand. And then Hansadutta Harikesh, Yasamati Nandan, they went out on Kirtan party, so they were leading the Kirtan party, and we went through the main thoroughfares of the town, and I looked back and I saw there was like 300 or 400 women. They were all following the chariot, and they were all chanting the Maha Mantra. So none of our men were amongst them. They just spontaneously burst out chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Our few devotees, they were at the front of the procession. They were chanting as well, but it was really moving. I mean, I had heard Prabhupada say that the Indian population, they're actually all devotees. And when I saw, this 400 ladies all going behind the chariot and chanting Hare Krishna, I could understand very clearly Prabhupada knew, wasn't exaggerating. In their hearts, most people in India are actually devotees. You just got to bring it out. So that was one of his programs. Go to the villages, introduce them to the chanting, offer your food, prasadam, and that will take it, that will establish you on the spiritual platform. So anyway, we arrived there, we sat down for a few minutes for this presentation, dance presentation, and then they led Prabhupada onto the chariot, and then there was an hour-long parade that took us through the main parts of the town and up the central thoroughfare leading to Sanand Palace. It was wonderful. All along the route, excited people clamored to get a glimpse of Srila Prabhupada and his foreign disciples. A large crowd preceded us, with several hundred women following behind. As the procession wound its way through the town, the ladies spontaneously burst into chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So without any prompting from any of our devotees. Although I'd read in Prabhupada's books that the village people in India are naturally inclined to become devotees, to see it actually practically manifested was a very moving experience. So the reception was spontaneous and genuinely heartwarming. There's a piety in India, especially in the villages, that simply does not exist anywhere else in the world. So therefore Prabhupada said that any birth in India is better than any birth in any other country in the world. So we said, what about the rickshawallahs? Prabhupada said, yes, also, they're Indian. This is their heritage. Yeah. So any birth in India is better than any birth anywhere else on the planet. So the next day, 26th of 1975, in the afternoon, the king and many local village leaders came for a darshan with Prabhupada. They discussed the need to educate people in spiritual values. Prabhupada again brought up the point that growing cash crops such as tobacco was senseless. So when we arrived there the next morning, Prabhupada had gone out for his regular walk, and as far as you could see they were growing tobacco. So it was a cash crop. And Prabhupada asked, well, what do they do with that? And it was explained, they gather it up, they take it to the market, they sell it, at a fixed rate, and then it's distributed to retailers all around the country. Whatever money that they get from that sale of that crop, they have to bring that back, and then the foodstuffs that they could have grown on the land anyway, they have to use the money to purchase that. So why, have the middleman? That was Prabhupada's point. You have the land, you grow your crops, whatever you need, self-sufficiency, and you sell the surplus. Instead, you're growing the crops, sending it way, way somewhere else where you have no control over the money. And then with the money that you get, you come back and buy the vegetables that you could have grown on your own land in the first place. So Prabhupada really wasn't impressed with that. And he told this committee, the king and the village leaders, that why are you wasting time growing tobacco? So he told them that he was prepared to travel to every village to preach the Bhagavad Gita, perform kirtan, and distribute prasadam if they were willing to organize it. So this was one of Prabhupada's ambitions, before he came to the West. Get 2 trucks with all the equipment and everything, and just go from village to village, chanting and talking on the Bhagavad Gita. So the next day, 27th of December, in the afternoon, Kartikeya, he was one of our first life members in Bombay, Kartikeya. He's dead now, but he was very close with Prabhupada. He came up to Ahmedabad for the programs with us. And he drove us 5 miles. He had one of these big American, like the 1950s Chevy, the big wide things. So there were a few of those in India at that time. And he had this American vehicle. He told Prabhupada he would donate it for the Sankirtan programs. So we were going around in the car. Prabhupada talked enthusiastically about village-to-village preaching. He is eager to see this program established, and he said that mass propaganda of Sankirtan and Prasadam distribution will save India. He said that if the programs are arranged, he will travel in his new car when it comes and take up to 12 men all around Gujarat to every village. So Prabhupada got enthused about the talk of preaching in all the villages. So upon arrival, Prabhupada was welcomed grandly and taken to an open area where 1,000 or so village people had gathered. So there was a village program that day. The leading men lined up and offered Prabhupada at least 20 or 30 garlands. Prabhupada chanted for a few minutes and then he began to speak. But it was so noisy with all the women and children that he stopped chanting and then he stopped talking and then began chanting again, this time getting the crowd to join in. After again he lectured, and at this time to a quiet audience. So for 20 minutes he gave a simple explanation about spiritual knowledge, and he impressed on them the need to follow a pure life following God's laws. His main intention was to get them to chant and take prasadam. A couple of days later we went to another village called Bavala, and in the mid-afternoon Kartikeya Mahadevia drove us all in his old American limousine for a program in another nearby town called Bavala. The population there was about 20,000. So along the way, Prabhupada incited our enthusiasm for village preaching programs. He told us that in the 1950s he had made plans to travel all over India, hoping to gather up a force of brahmachari preachers. So somehow or another that never happened because he had neither men nor money. So his idea was that he traveled around, he would, speak with people and ask them, you give your son to join the Sankirtan party. That way he was going to expand. But nobody wanted to do it. They would tell him, no, nowadays the only thing that's worthwhile is technology. So they were sending their sons to, university or whatever to learn technology. Nobody was interested in, spiritual programs anymore. So nobody would give their sons. So Prabhupada told us he had this plan for preaching in the West. So he said, now that Krishna has sent him so many nice young men to help fulfill his long-cherished vision, Jasamati Nandan eagerly offered to organize a program in a different village every day, and Kartikeya even offered his car if Prabhupada wanted it. So Prabhupada encouraged Hansadutta to take up this engagement, declaring that he would personally travel with their party. It was such an exciting concept, and Prabhupada was so enthusiastic. The fact that such a program would be almost impossible physically for Prabhupada wasn't even mentioned. For Prabhupada, preaching means there is no consideration of anything other than spreading Krishna consciousness, whatever the cost. So when we reached Bavala, like Sanand, thousands of people came out to greet him. We were taken first to a small house. Prabhupada was worshipped by the local Brahmins, and then later on he boarded a camel cart for a procession through the main streets. So usually, they would bring out their bulls and the carts, but here they were using camels. So we got up, one camel cart had Prabhupada's Vyasa, and myself and Hansadutta was standing on it immediately behind Srila Prabhupada. And then there was about half a dozen more camel carts behind us coming in a line. So we had a procession through the main streets. There were 4 or 5 camel carts, many bullock carts, and many, many thousands of people. Practically the whole town turned out. So Prabhupada was perched up, high on a seat, covered with a white cloth. I sat in front of him on the deck. Hansadutta stood directly behind Prabhupada. So that was a little troublesome for Hansadutta, because every time the caravan stopped, the camel that was pulling the cart behind us would inch forward so close that he was literally breathing down Hansadutta's neck. This big, ugly camel over his shoulder there, pulling away. So we stopped once at a Swami Narayan temple, and then we went on to a meeting hall. After garlands were given by leading citizens, the local children performed a lovely Rasa Leela dance. It was pure and simple, and Prabhupada enjoyed it. Then he led a kirtan, and he gave a fairly short lecture in English on the Bhagavad Gita 3.14, about food grains being the result of performance of yajna or sacrifice. So about 3,000 noisy but respectful people packed into an open area to hear Prabhupada speak. And he told them, don't grow this jute and tobacco, produce food grains, chant, avoid the 4 aspects of sinful life, and please Krishna by your work. So Prabhupada's lecture was brief but direct and to the point. After explaining that the purpose of life is simply to please Lord Vishnu, he outlined the process of work by which this could be done. He said, it is not possible that we can give up sinful activities by our own endeavor, because in this age of Kali, everyone is addicted to some kind of sinful life. So if we remember to surrender to Krishna as he is instructing, fully, without any reservation, he will help us to become freed from the sinful reactions. So what time is it? How long are we going for? How long are we going for? Is anybody, are we going to be here all day? Or now it's 10 o'clock. You have prasadam now, or?
Yeah, we have prasadam now.
Breakfast prasadam. Okay, so I'm going to stop at this point. There's a couple of more entries for Sanand. Two more entries and then we'll stop. So on December the 30th, we were still in Sanand. Early in the morning, Prabhupada took his leave. So that was the day that we left there, graciously thanking the king and his entire family for their kindness and hospitality. He was very happy with the programs, and he talked with the king's son about organizing village preaching. Prabhupada's enthusiasm has clearly rubbed off on the Yuvraj, and he seemed very eager to help us to push on Lord Chaitanya's mission. So that was the son of the king. He was about 50 or 55 years old. So the next day we were back in Bombay, December the 31st. Hansadutta is now thoroughly enlivened with the idea of village-to-village preaching in India. Recent problems in Germany, where he is the GBC, have virtually stopped the preaching there. So he's looking for a new engagement. So Prabhupada is therefore encouraging him to preach in the villages in India. Hansadutta spent the entire day inquiring about the prices of buses and other equipment, and he talked with Srila Prabhupada about bringing some men over from Germany to form an all-India travelling Sankirtan party. So he actually did that. He went, his month as Prabhupada's secretary was up at the end of December. He flew back to Germany. In Germany, they'd had a lot of problems. In 1974, the police raided the temple, that Schloss Rettershof that they had. They confiscated 800,000 German marks. Yes, now they have the euro. But we had 800,000 German marks in the bank. The police got the magistrates to put a freeze on that money, so we couldn't touch it. It actually collected that for preaching in India, for the Food for Life program. So that was captured by the government. The temple was almost shut down by the police. They were arrested. They were charged with all kinds of things like extortion and whatever. It became a big thing in the newspapers. Everybody was against us. We weren't getting any support. There were things like Hansaduta showed us a newspaper. So on the front page of the paper, there was a picture of a devotee. And then underneath the caption, it was all about somebody had murdered somebody else. And then the newspaper man, they'd given this picture of the devotee, and the question was, did the murderer look like this? So this was the kind of publicity that we were generating from Germany. So it became really difficult for Hansaduta and the men to stay there and preach. They were doing something, but it was really not very healthy. So Prabhupada allowed Hansaduta to come to India and make, South India, I think he gave him as the GBC, and he stayed here for a few years. So he had gone at the end of 1975 back to Germany. He bought four buses, and they drove them overland from Germany through Turkey and Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they ended up arriving at the Mayapur festival just when Prabhupada had got there. So they brought these 4 buses, and then they spent the whole of the next year going around preaching in these buses all around India. So Prabhupada was very happy with that. He was very pleased with that. Okay, so any quick questions or comments? All right, we'll finish there. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.